My daughter's fiancé called me a washed-up electrician living in the past at his luxury development showcase. While his investors laughed and my daughter looked at the floor, I just nodded, set down my drink, and walked out to my truck. What he didn't know was that I'd already spotted 3 major code violations in his billion-dollar project. By the time I reached the parking lot, I knew exactly which phone calls would bring his empire crashing down. Before I go further, you need to understand something about me. I'm not the type who looks for fights. I spent 37 years working with my hands, first as an apprentice electrician at 19, then running my own small electrical contracting business in Fort Worth. Nothing fancy, just honest work. Residential wiring, small commercial jobs, the occasional industrial contract. I never got rich, but I helped build half the neighborhoods in Tarrant County. My trucks were always paid off, my crews always got their checks on time, and my work always passed inspection the first time. That was enough for me. My daughter Jessica is my whole world. Her mother, my wife Linda, died in a car accident when Jess was just 14. Drunk driver ran a red light on Highway 287. After that, it was just the two of us in our 3-bedroom ranch house in North Richland Hills. Jess was brilliant, always was. Straight A's, full ride to UT Austin, business degree, then an MBA from SMU. She landed a job at a commercial real estate firm in downtown Dallas, making more in her first year than I'd ever made in my best year. About 18 months ago, she started dating this guy named Blake Patterson. She'd been talking about him for weeks before I finally met him. Real estate developer, she said, building luxury condos all over Dallas. Comes from money, went to Vanderbilt. His family owns half of Highland Park. We were supposed to meet at this steakhouse in Uptown, the kind of place where they bring you bread with olive oil and balsamic vinegar like that's something special. I showed up 15 minutes early, wearing my good jeans and a button-down shirt I'd ironed myself. Blake rolled in 25 minutes late in a BMW that probably cost more than my house. No apology, just slid into the booth, checking his Rolex. He was 35, tall, with that country club tan and perfectly styled hair. When he finally looked at me, his eyes did this quick scan. My Timberland boots, my Seiko watch I'd owned since 1989, my calloused hands with the scar across my left thumb from a wire stripper accident in 02. Mr. Brennan, good to finally meet you. Blake's handshake was weak, like he was afraid he'd catch something. Jess has told me all about you. You're in electrical work, right? Was. I retired last year. Sold my business to one of my foremen. Ah, smart move, he signaled for the waiter. Getting out while you still can. Construction's changing. Everything's automated now. Smart homes, AI-controlled systems. Probably hard to keep up at a certain age. I let it slide. Jess was beaming at him like he'd said something profound. The dinner lasted 2 hours and felt like 6. Blake talked about his projects, his investors, his vision for transforming the Dallas skyline. Every few minutes, he'd drop some comment about old-school contractors who couldn't adapt, or small-time operators who played it safe instead of thinking big. When I mentioned a hospital renovation I'd done in 2015, Blake's phone rang. He took the call right there at the table, talking loud about square footage and profit margins while I sat there with my fork in my hand. The bill came to $340. I pulled out my wallet. Blake waved me off with this big theatrical gesture. Don't worry about it, Mr. Brennan. I've got this. I know retirement on a contractor's savings probably doesn't leave much room for places like this. Jess squeezed his arm like he'd just donated a kidney. I drove home in my 12-year-old F-150, hands tight on the wheel, trying to figure out what bothered me more, the condescension in his voice or the fact that my daughter didn't seem to notice it. Over the next 6 months, I watched Blake's pattern emerge. He visited our house exactly once when Jess wanted to show him where she grew up. He walked through our living room, took in the furniture Linda and I had picked out together 20 years ago, the photos on the wall of Jess's softball games and graduation, the built-in bookshelf I'd made from reclaimed lumber. Cozy, he said, and it wasn't a compliment. His eyes lingered on the old ceiling fan I'd installed myself, the kind with pull chains, and I saw him smirk. His parents were worse. Richard and Caroline Patterson, lived in a mansion in University Park, one of those colonial-style places, with the circular driveway and columns out front. They invited us for dinner in August, just as the Texas heat was getting unbearable. Their dining room had a chandelier that threw rainbow patterns across walls covered in oil paintings. Caroline served something she called deconstructed beef, Wellington on plates so expensive-looking I was nervous using the knife. "So, Tom," Richard said, pouring wine from a bottle he announced cost $200. "Jessica tells us you worked in electrical. Small operation, I assume?" "That's right. Started with just me and a helper truck. Built it up to 3 crews over the years." Caroline's smile was tight. "How admirable. It must have been so rewarding working with your hands all those years. Physical labor keeps you young, they say." I knew exactly what she meant. People who worked with their hands because they couldn't make it any other way. People who weren't smart enough for real business. "Very rewarding," I said evenly. "I wired half the schools in Fort Worth, put electrical in homes where kids grew up safe because the work was done right." "Of course," Caroline said, "though I imagine Jessica might want something more for her own children. Financial security, the right schools, opportunities." She glanced at Blake. Fortunately, Blake's positioned to provide that kind of life. Blake squeezed Jess's hand. "Don't worry. I'll make sure Jess and our future family have everything they could ever want. Not everyone can provide at that level, but I can." He looked right at me when he said it. I finished my steak in silence. 3 weeks later, Jess called with news. Blake had proposed at some rooftop restaurant overlooking downtown Dallas. She was ecstatic, talking about venues and dress shopping. I told her I was happy for her, and I meant it. She deserved happiness. But something cold was settling in my chest. And it wasn't the beer I was drinking. The engagement party was at Blake's main office in the design district, this converted warehouse with exposed brick and those expensive Edison bulb chandeliers. Patterson Development Group occupied the entire second floor. About 90 people showed up. Blake's employees, investors, friends, family. I arrived in my good sport coat, the navy one I'd bought for Jess's MBA graduation. The party was already going when I got there. Jess found me near the entrance, beautiful in a cocktail dress I'd never seen before. "Dad, I'm so glad you made it." She hugged me, then pulled back, her smile fading slightly. "Listen, Blake's about to make a toast. He's really nervous because some major investors are here, so maybe just keep things light if anyone asks about work." "What do you mean, keep things light?" "Just, don't go into too much detail about the electrical business. Some of Blake's investors are old money types who might not understand that trade work is respectable." I stared at my daughter. "You're asking me to be ashamed of what I did for 37 years? I'm asking you not to make tonight difficult, Dad." She walked away before I could respond. I stood by the bar with a Shiner Bock I didn't want, watching Blake work the room. He was good at it, all smiles and firm handshakes, making everyone feel important, everyone except me. He nodded in my direction once when I arrived and hadn't looked at me since. Around 8 o'clock, Blake climbed onto a small stage they'd set up. Someone handed him a microphone. The room went quiet. "Thank you all for being here tonight. Building something real in this city takes vision. It takes the willingness to bet everything when others are playing it safe. It takes, and I can't stress this enough, the courage to think bigger than the generation before you." He paused, scanning the room. His eyes landed on me for just a second. Growing up, I watched my father build a real estate empire through calculated risk and ambition. He taught me that security is the enemy of greatness. While some people are happy with steady work and a pension, real builders are reshaping cities. Scattered laughter. Someone near me whispered, "Is he talking about someone specific?" Caroline Patterson, standing with a group of women in designer dresses, said just loud enough for me to hear, "Well, not everyone has the vision for development. Some people need that union pension and health insurance." More laughter. Jess's face went red, but she didn't say anything. She was standing next to Blake's sister, both of them studying their champagne glasses. Blake continued, "I'm grateful Jessica understands the difference between settling and striving. She could have chosen a simpler life, something more predictable, but she chose excellence. She chose the future." He raised his glass. Everyone applauded. I set down my beer and walked out. No one stopped me. No one seemed to notice. I drove home through the Dallas night, past the high-rises Blake probably dreamed of building, past the construction sites with their temporary fencing and orange cones, back to my house in North Richland Hills, where the porch light was flickering because I needed to check the wiring. Inside, I sat at my kitchen table, the same table where I'd helped Jess with her physics homework, where Linda and I had paid bills together, where I'd eaten dinner alone for the last 19 years. And I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Not anger, exactly. Recognition. I'd spent my whole career identifying problems in electrical systems, finding code violations, spotting safety hazards. Blake Patterson was a system with flaws. I just needed to find them. I went to my garage and pulled down a box from the top shelf. Inside were files from before I ran my own business, when I'd worked for 5 years as an electrical inspector for the city of Fort Worth. I'd learned to read blueprints, building permits, contractor licenses. I'd caught corner-cutting contractors twice, people using substandard wire, skipping required inspections, bribing inspectors. I opened my laptop and started searching. Patterson Development Group had a website with a projects page, 12 developments across Dallas-Fort Worth, from luxury condos in Uptown to mixed-use buildings in Deep Ellum. The flagship project was called Platinum Residences, a 40-story luxury high-rise going up in downtown Dallas. Their press releases called it a $380 million project, 500 units, targeting completion in 14 months. I spent the next 5 hours reading everything I could find, building permits, zoning approvals, contractor registrations. Something felt off about the timeline in their announcements. 14 months for a 40-story building was aggressive, extremely aggressive. The next morning, I called an old buddy from my inspector days. Marcus Webb had moved up to become chief electrical inspector for the city of Dallas. We'd worked together in Fort Worth in the 90s. "Tom Brennan," he said when he answered. "Man, it's been what, 6 years?" "7. Listen, Marcus. You ever heard of Patterson Development Group?" A pause. "Blake Patterson's outfit?" "Yeah. They've been building all over Dallas. Why?" "His fiancé is my daughter. I'm trying to understand his operation." Another pause, longer this time. "Look, I can't give you specific information on active permits, but let's just say if I were you, I'd have questions." "What kind of questions?" "The kind where construction timelines don't match required inspection schedules. The kind where you wonder how they're hitting deadlines when the work should take longer. You want my honest opinion? Someone who knows building codes should take a real close look at their inspection records." I thanked him and hung up. I spent the next 3 weeks becoming an expert on Patterson Development Group. Every permit application, every variance request, every public filing with the city. I found their financial projections in documents filed for their investors. They were promising returns that seemed too good to be true. Then I found it. A small notation in their permit timeline for Platinum Residences. They'd scheduled their electrical rough-in inspection for the same week as their plumbing rough-in. That's not how it works. Electrical rough-in has to happen, get inspected and approved, before plumbing rough-in can start. Otherwise, you risk drilling through electrical conduit, creating fire hazards, violating a dozen safety codes. Either they didn't know what they were doing, or they were cutting corners and falsifying inspection records. I dug deeper. I found an online forum for construction workers in Dallas, where a few former Patterson Development employees had posted anonymously. Complaints about being pressured to work faster than safe, to skip steps, to look the other way when supervisors told them to. One post mentioned an electrical foreman who'd quit after being told to use cheaper wire than the plans specified. I documented everything. Then I reached out to someone I'd mentored 15 years ago. Danny Rodriguez had been a young electrician working on my crew, eager to learn, ask good questions. Now he ran his own shop and had done subcontracting work all over DFW. "Mr. Brennan," he said when I called. "Man, this is a surprise. How are you?" "Good, Danny. Listen, you ever work with Patterson Development?" A long silence. "Once. About 2 years ago. Small job, tenant improvement in one of their commercial properties." "How was it?" "Honestly, they wanted everything done yesterday, and didn't want to pay for quality work. My bid was too high for them. They went with someone else, some fly-by-night outfit that pulled permits, but I heard never got final inspections. He hesitated. Why are you asking? Just curious about their reputation. Mr. Brennan, if you're asking if they're the kind of developer who cuts corners to hit profit margins, yeah, that's what I've heard. Can't prove anything. But word gets around in the trades. I thanked him and added this to my notes. By early November, I had a file folder 3 inches thick, inspection timeline discrepancies, anonymous employee complaints, permit violations, financial projections that required impossibly fast construction schedules. None of it was smoking gun proof, but together, it painted a picture of a company gaming the system, taking shortcuts, risking safety to maximize profits. The wedding was set for January 21st at the Crescent Hotel, $1,500 a plate, 200 guests. Jess had asked for my guest list. I gave her 6 names. 2 weeks later, she called to say the venue had capacity issues. Only 2 of my guests could come. I didn't argue. The week before Christmas, Blake's company held their annual investor showcase at the Anatole Hotel. Big event, investors, contractors, city officials, even a reporter from the Dallas Morning News. Blake had invited Jess, and she asked if I wanted to come. Blake thought it would be good for you to see what he's built, she said. Maybe you'd like to understand his world better. I said yes. I bought a new suit for the occasion. Charcoal, gray, well-tailored. Nothing flashy, but I looked like a man who'd earned a living honestly for almost 4 decades. The ballroom was decorated like a tech conference. Blue lighting, massive screens showing renderings of Blake's buildings, tables with high cocktail chairs designed to keep people circulating. I arrived at 7. Jess found me immediately, looking stressed. Dad, thank God. Listen, Blake's really nervous tonight. Some major investors are here, and he's doing a big presentation about platinum residences. Just be supportive, okay? When have I not been? She gave me a look that said she had opinions but didn't voice them. The presentation started at 8. Blake took the stage in a suit that probably cost $3,000. Behind him, the screens showed architectural renderings, construction timelines, profit projections that looked like hockey sticks. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for believing in Patterson Development. 3 years ago, I had a vision. I saw a Dallas skyline that reflected the city's ambition, where luxury living wasn't confined to a few neighborhoods. And I had a choice. I could play it safe, follow the old-school development model, do everything the slow, expensive way my grandfather's generation did it. Or I could innovate. He clicked to the next slide, showing construction photos. I chose innovation, because that's what separates real developers from everyone else. While some people are content with small projects and long timelines, he paused, his eyes finding me in the crowd for just a second. Real builders know how to move fast, cut through red tape, and deliver results. Polite laughter. Caroline Patterson was nearby with a group of other investors' wives. She leaned toward one of them and said, loud enough that I could hear, "Of course, not everyone understands modern development. The old trade workers, they think everything has to be done the slow way. Times have changed." The woman glanced at me, then back at Caroline. "That's Jessica's father," Caroline said quietly. "Retired electrician. Very hands-on work, I'm sure. But he wouldn't understand what Blake's doing." More barely suppressed laughter. Blake continued, "Our flagship project, Platinum Residences, is on track for completion in just 14 months. We're hitting every deadline, every benchmark, and we're going to deliver returns that will exceed every projection." I'd seen the permit timeline. 14 months was impossible, unless they were skipping inspections. The presentation ended to applause. People swarmed Blake with questions. Jess went to his side, beaming. An hour later, Blake was doing informal Q&A, working the room with a microphone. He made his way near where I was standing with my water glass. A young guy, clearly a few drinks in, called out, "Blake, man, where do you get the confidence?" "My dad wanted me to take over his construction company, do things the old way. How'd you know to ignore that?" Blake laughed. "You have to trust your vision more than other people's fear. Take my future father-in-law, for example. He gestured vaguely toward me. Spent his whole career running wire, doing it by the book. Union wages, slow and steady. And look, there's nothing wrong with that if you're not ambitious. But it's not building anything significant. People turned to look at me. I was 10 feet away, clearly within earshot. I mean, look at the guy, Blake continued. Still drives a truck from 2013. Still lives in the same house he bought in the 90s. That's the safe path. That's what happens when you choose security over vision. Someone laughed uncomfortably. Blake grinned, encouraged. Honestly, when Jess first told me her dad was an electrician, I thought she was joking. Like, buddy, we have smart systems now. We have automation. Who's still pulling wire manually? But hey, somebody's got to wire the tract homes for people who can't afford real luxury, right? Might as well be someone who's already accepted they're never going to build anything that matters. The laughter was louder now. Not everyone. Some people looked uncomfortable. But enough. Caroline was practically giggling behind her wine glass. Richard Patterson, standing nearby, shook his head with an indulgent smile. And Jess, my daughter, was standing at the edge of Blake's group, her face bright red. She'd heard every word. She looked at me once, just once, and then turned away and started talking to someone else. I set down my water glass, walked past the screens showing Blake's impossible timeline, past the investors who didn't know enough about construction to question the numbers, past my daughter who couldn't look at me, and headed for the door. In the parking garage, I sat in my F-150 and breathed. My hands were shaking, not from anger, but from clarity. I drove home, straight to my garage, and pulled out the file folder I'd been building. Everything was documented. Every discrepancy, every shortcut, every sign that Patterson Development was a house of cards, built on code violations and falsified inspections. At midnight on December 22nd, I composed an email. The recipients were the City of Dallas Building Inspection Department, the Texas Department of Licensing and Regulation, and the Dallas Fire Marshal's Office. The subject line was, "Formal complaint regarding code violations and falsified inspection records at Platinum Residences Development." I attached 42 pages. Permit timeline discrepancies. Photos I'd taken of the construction site showing work that couldn't have passed inspection yet. Screenshots from the contractor forum. Technical analysis of how their 14-month timeline violated required inspection sequences. Comparisons between their public statements and actual permit records. I didn't sign it with my name. I used a temporary email account and sent it through a VPN, something Danny Rodriguez had taught me about when I asked him how to stay anonymous online. At 12:34 a.m., I hit send. Then I went to bed. Christmas came and went. Jess invited me for dinner at Blake's penthouse in Uptown. I went, brought a gift, said nothing about the showcase. Blake was pleasant to me in that distant way wealthy people treat service workers. Jess seemed relieved I wasn't causing problems. The wedding was 4 weeks away. Jess had asked me to give a toast. I'd told her I'd think about it. On January 6th, the article appeared in the Dallas Morning News business section. Major Dallas Development faces safety investigation. Small article, easy to miss. It mentioned Platinum Residences by name. Noted that the city had launched an investigation into whether proper inspections had been conducted, whether building codes were being followed. Patterson Development issued a statement calling it routine and expressing confidence in their practices. But I knew how these things worked. Once inspectors start looking close, they don't stop. Jess called that evening, her voice tight. "Did you see the article?" "I did." Blake's devastated. This could ruin everything. The wedding, his company, his reputation. Investors are already asking questions. If his work is solid, he has nothing to worry about. A long silence. "Dad, you didn't have anything to do with this, did you?" "Me? I'm a retired electrician. I pull weeds from my garden and watch football. What would I know about filing complaints with the city?" Another silence, longer this time. "I have to go," she said. Over the next 2 weeks, more articles appeared. One in D Magazine, one in the Dallas Business Journal. Each one citing unnamed sources, familiar with the investigation. each one digging deeper into Patterson Development's practices. City inspectors showed up at Platinum residences and found electrical work that had been covered up before inspection, plumbing installed before electrical was approved, fire suppression systems that didn't meet code, work that had inspection stamps on the permits but had never actually been inspected. 3 of Blake's major investors pulled their funding, citing concerns about liability. The project's completion date got pushed back 9 months. The budget jumped from $380 million to $490 million. On January 17th, 4 days before the wedding, Blake called me. First time he'd called me directly in the 18 months I'd known him. "Mr. Brennan, we need to talk." "About what?" "You know damn well about what. The investigation, the articles. This all started right after the showcase. Coincidence? I suppose." His voice was hard now, the country club polish gone. "I know this was you. I don't know how, but I know. Blake, I'm a 61-year-old retired electrician who watches Gunsmoke reruns. I don't have the kind of knowledge to trigger a building inspection investigation. But if the city found problems, maybe you should ask yourself why those problems existed. You're trying to destroy my company. I didn't create the code violations they found. You did." He hung up. The wedding went ahead. I wore my new suit. I sat at table 22, near the kitchen, with distant relatives of Blake's I'd never met. Jess was beautiful walking down the aisle, and for those 3 minutes, I forgot everything else. The reception was elegant and expensive and perfectly choreographed. I sat through dinner, through speeches, through Blake's toast, thanking his parents for showing him what success looks like. I didn't give a speech. Jess had quietly removed me from the schedule. Near the end of the night, Blake approached me by the coat check. We were alone for the first time. "I don't know exactly what you did," he said quietly, "but my lawyers are looking into everything. When they find proof, you'll regret it." I met his eyes. "Sue me, for what? I haven't done anything illegal. I haven't lied. If there's an investigation, that's between you and the city." His jaw clenched. "You're a bitter old man who couldn't stand that your daughter chose someone successful." "No," I said. "I'm a father who taught his daughter that honest work matters. You should try it." I left him standing there. 2 weeks after the wedding, the final blow came. The city of Dallas issued a stop work order on Platinum residences, pending a full safety review. The fire marshal found that fire suppression systems didn't meet code. The electrical inspector found that major portions of the building's wiring needed to be torn out and redone. The plumbing had to be inspected again because there was no record of proper approval. The project's budget ballooned to $600 million. 5 investors sued for fraud. Blake's board of directors voted him out as CEO. Jess didn't call. I went back to my routine. In February, I started volunteering at a trade school in Fort Worth, teaching basic electrical to kids who wanted to learn a trade. One of them, a kid named Miguel from a rough neighborhood, showed real talent. I stayed late twice a week to work with him. In March, on a Sunday afternoon, there was a knock on my door. Jess stood on my porch, her eyes red. "Can I come in?" I stepped aside. We sat in my kitchen, the same table where I'd done my research. "Blake knows it was you," she said. "He can't prove it, but he knows." "Is that why you're here?" "No." She was crying now. "I'm here because I need to understand why." "Why would you do that to him?" "Do what? Tell the truth about his construction practices? Destroy his career, humiliate him, ruin everything we built together." I looked at my daughter and chose my words carefully. At that showcase, Blake called me irrelevant. He mocked my career, my truck, my house, everything I built in 37 years. He did it publicly, deliberately, to make me look small in front of his investors. "And you, Jess, you stood there and said nothing. You turned away." She flinched. "I'm not a rich man," I continued. "Never will be. I made an honest living keeping buildings safe, keeping families safe. I drove an old truck and lived in a modest house, and I'm proud of that." But Blake looked at my life and saw failure. He saw something worth mocking. "It was just talk, Dad." No, it wasn't. And worse, his company was cutting corners. Those investors who trusted him, he was lying to them. Those people who'll eventually live in that building, He was risking their safety. That's not innovation. That's fraud. So you destroyed him? No. I reported code violations. There's a difference. Jess wiped her eyes. I should have defended you. At the engagement party. At the showcase. Yes, you should have. We sat in silence. Blake's working for his father's company now, she said finally. 60,000 a year. He's angry all the time. At me, at himself, at you. The marriage is barely holding on. I'm sorry you're hurting. Are you, though? I thought about it. I'm sorry you're in pain. I'm not sorry I held him accountable for violating building codes that exist to keep people safe. She nodded slowly. He asked me to choose. Between you and him. My chest tightened. What did you say? I said I needed time. She stood, gathering her coat. I'm staying with a friend for a while. Figure things out. You're always welcome here, Jess. She paused at the door. I looked into what you did. The documentation you gathered. The technical analysis. The way you filed it so it couldn't be traced back. That wasn't the work of some washed-up electrician. Dad, that was brilliant. I told you. I spent 37 years finding problems and fixing them. Blake's corners cutting was a problem. I fixed it. She left without another word. 4 months later, Jess filed for divorce. I didn't hear it from her, heard it through a mutual friend. But 2 weeks after that, she called. Dad, I'm moving into a new apartment, 2-bedroom in Arlington. I was wondering if you could help me with something. The electrical seems weird, lights flickering, outlets not working. I remembered you always knew how to fix everything. I can take a look. When works for you? This weekend? I'll bring my tools. We spent Saturday afternoon in her empty apartment. The electrical was a mess. Previous tenant had done some amateur wiring that was dangerous. I showed Jess how to identify problems, how to trace circuits, how to do it right. She asked questions like she used to when she was young, genuinely curious. As we worked, she said quietly, I'm sorry, Dad, for all of it. Blake was wrong about you, about your work, your life. You're not irrelevant. You're the opposite. I'm an electrician. That's all I ever claimed to be. No, you're someone who taught me that doing things right matters more than doing them fast. That safety matters more than profit. I forgot that for a while. We fixed her electrical by evening. Nothing fancy, just proper wiring, up to code, safe. As I packed my tools, Jess ran her hand along the new outlet cover I'd installed. Thank you, she said. For this, for everything. I hugged my daughter, and for the first time in months, it felt like we might be okay. Driving home that evening, past the half-finished Platinum residences with its stop work notice still posted, past the mansion in University Park where Blake's parents lived, I thought about something I used to tell every apprentice on their first day. Do it right or don't do it at all, I'd say. Cut corners and eventually someone gets hurt. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but eventually. Use the right materials, follow the code, and you'll build something that keeps people safe for generations. Blake Patterson had built his company on shortcuts and lies. I'd simply made sure the city inspectors looked close enough to see the truth. My hands were steady on the wheel. The Texas sun was setting, painting the sky orange and purple. And for the first time since that dinner at the steakhouse 18 months ago, I felt like myself again. Not irrelevant, not washed up. Just a 61-year-old electrician who'd taught one more lesson about the consequences of doing shoddy work. Tomorrow, I'd go back to the trade school. Miguel had his licensing exam coming up. I'd promised to help him study. That was my life. Honest work, proper codes, honest consequences, and I wouldn't change a thing.